All right, let's talk about the Boston 12, but to get there, we need to talk about this shoe first, the Adizero SL2. Now, I've just finished all of my initial impressions and initial content for this shoe. That's what's been the past week of content on this channel. And in my initial impressions video for this shoe, which, by the way, if you want to watch that, I'll put a link in the description. And frankly, any other video I mentioned in this video, there'll also be a link to it in the description if you want to go check that out. But in my initial impressions video for this shoe, I talked a lot about how I think this shoe now eclipses and takes the use case away from the Boston 12 for the majority of what people were using. And in the comments for the video and some of the other Versus videos I did, a lot of people were asking questions around what did I really mean by that? Well, I think it's an interesting topic that gets into a bunch of interesting Adizero stuff that's going on right now and kind of talks about the future a bit. That's what I want to get into here. There's no denying that last year in 2023, this shoe, the Boston 12, was very, very popular. This was probably one of the most popular shoes last year, and it topped a lot of people's best of list last year. And it's a great shoe. I didn't run in this shoe last year. I instead opted for this shoe, the Adios 8, when these both came out around the same time, because this gave me a lower stack. It gave me more pure Lightstrike Pro under the forefoot, and I really enjoyed this shoe. Made a lot of content about this shoe. I'll put the link in the description to the videos about this shoe. This was a great shoe, and I'm glad I opted for this shoe over this. But in the winter, I came to this shoe and I finally reviewed it. Now, I had a bit of a grudge with Adidas and what they did to the Boston series. I love the Boston 9. I've talked a lot about this shoe on this channel. The Boston 10 and 11 were complete, just awful shoes. And they also turned the Bostons into a bit of a different direction. But again, I'm sure in the comments there'll be one or two of you who really love the Boston 10 or 11. Let me know about that. But fundamentally, the Boston 10 and 11 were not well loved, not well reviewed. No one really liked those shoes. So I was very leery of this shoe when it came out last year. And that's why it took me till the spring to get to this shoe. But I'm glad it did, because this, to me, really redeems the Boston series for Adidas. But because there wasn't really a good daily trainer from Adidas last year, yes, the Adizero SL existed, but it wasn't really up to par with the rest of the Adizero range. And then outside of the Adizero range, there really wasn't a valid daily trainer from Adidas. Sure, the Ultra Boost Light existed, but no one really trains in that shoe. Again, in the comments, I'm sure there'll be one or two of you who really love that shoe. And by the way, I have seen leaks of an Ultra Boost 2 coming out at some point this year. So there is another one of those coming out if you love that shoe. But Adidas really didn't have a daily trainer last year. And by default, this one became the Adizero daily trainer just because it was so good. It was so versatile. Additionally, this shoe got lumped in with the whole super trainer thing, which, again, I've talked a lot about the whole super trainer thing on this channel. Bunch of videos on that, link in the description. Not a fan of the whole super trainer thing, the idea of a plated shoe as a daily trainer. I'm never going to recommend that. If that's something you like to do you, go for it. But that's something I'm never going to personally do, nor is it ever anything I'm going to recommend. But this became one of the best daily trainers of the year last year. But to me, this is an awful daily trainer for the simple reason that it's just too stiff. This is a stiff shoe. Like, I'm putting a lot of force into this, and this shoe's barely bending. Now, I've had some comments in my videos last week saying that this isn't a stiff shoe. Well, this is a very stiff shoe. This shoe, the Endorphin Speed 4, which is very similar to the 3, this was probably the other super trainer that everyone loved last year and, really went toe-to-toe with the Boston 12. Not the 4 or the 3. But my point with this shoe is this is a flexible shoe. Even though there's a plate in this shoe, this is still a very flexible shoe. But this shoe is not flexible. And if you think this is a flexible shoe, I'm actually very scared to know what you think is actually a stiff shoe. Now, it's true, this isn't as stiff as the Adios Pro 3 because it isn't carbon fiber rods in here. The energy rod system in this shoe is glass fiber, but it's still stiff because it goes from heel to toe and it's a much stiffer system. Additionally, you have a big chunk of Lightstrike Pro in this shoe, and Lightstrike Pro is a fairly dense material that does take time to break in, and it's never really been the most flexible material. But the biggest problem with the flexibility in this shoe is the Lightstrike 2.0 carrier layer in this shoe. The Lightstrike 2.0 in this shoe is fairly soft, but unlike what's in this shoe, the Adizero SL2 this year, I think the Lightstrike 2.0 that's in this shoe is much more dense. It's much less airy and flexible. The Lightstrike 2 in this shoe is very flexible. It's very airy. I don't think it's any softer than what was in this shoe. It's just much more flexible, airy, and you can actually feel how much lighter this is than this shoe. It actually just feels more airy. But the combination of the midsole construction, the energy rods, and just the stiffness of the foams in this shoe just made this shoe so stiff, which is why I don't like it as a daily trainer. But last year in 2023, again, the Adizero SL was still also very stiff and also not that dynamic to run in. It was a fine shoe, but it wasn't really up to par with Adizero, which is why a lot of people spent a lot of time running in this shoe as a daily trainer. But now, in 2024, we have the SL2, and as I said, this is a much more flexible, much more airy shoe that I think does eclipse a lot of what people were using this shoe for. This shoe does easy running much better than this shoe. This is a valid daily trainer because it is very flexible, which I think is really important for a daily trainer, because when I'm training that 80% of running, that's your easy running, I want the training effect of my foot having to work, of flexing, of building foot strength. I want to do the work. I don't want the shoe doing the work for me with the rods and the plate and the rocker and all that rolling me forward. I want to train the majority in a flexible, neutral shoe, and that's exactly what Adidas delivered here in the Adizero SL2. That's not to say I don't enjoy training in a plated shoe. I train in plated shoes very often, but I reserve them for threshold running, important workouts. If I'm training for a marathon or half marathon, I'm going to do my race pace, half or full marathon pace workout in that shoe. And this is a very valid shoe because ultimately this is a tempo trainer. Daily trainer, tempo trainer. And that really is the relationship that I think Adidas designed these two shoes to do. And in 2024, where we actually do now have a valid daily trainer, where does this shoe go now? That's kind of my big question in this video. The other reason I'm asking that, and I pointed this out in a few other videos, they'll be linked in the description, is that I actually think this is the better tempo trainer from Adidas now. And as I talked about in the Adizero SL2 initial impressions, I think there's a relationship between these two shoes now that's very intentional from Adidas. I talked a lot about the Takumi Sen and the Takumi Ren. Now, the Takumi Ren was the trainer component to the older Takumi Sens, pre-Takumi Sen 8. And I'm not saying this is the Takumi Ren brought back, but I do think Adidas looked at the relationship between the Takumi Sen and Takumi Ren in the evolution of this shoe. And now I really do think there's a huge overlap in use case of pairing these two shoes together, which makes this the better tempo trainer for most things in my mind. Additionally, it's got the same glass fiber rods that the Boston has, exact same rods actually, heel to toe, same rods, same curve, same everything, but this is a pure Lightstrike Pro midsole. It is a little bit thinner, but fundamentally you have as much Lightstrike Pro as you had in the Boston 12 in this shoe without the carrier foam of the Lightstrike 2. If you really look at them, you look at just the layer of Lightstrike Pro in this shoe, it's kind of what this shoe was. There's just no Lightstrike in this shoe. And that makes this shoe much more flexible. It's still a stiff shoe. You still get the pop of the rods, but there's more torsional twist to this shoe. I just think this is a much more natural shoe to run in than the Boston 12. And in my mind, as I was saying, I do think Adidas intended these two shoes to work really well together. And to illustrate that, let's look at my performance matrix. Now here's the performance matrix that I actually showed in the initial impressions video for the SL2. Exact same thing. This was the actual chart that's in there. And this puts the SL2, the Boston 12, and the Takumi Sen on the same chart. And you can see where the overlap is now between the SL2 and the Takumi Sen and how the Boston 12 is sort of kind of in the middle. You don't really need it for a lot of use cases. There are specific use cases where it's still valuable, and that's what I want to get into. But if I take this chart and I add in the two marathon racers that Adidas has in the Adizero range, the Adios Pro 3 and the Evo 1, then I think this begins to get a little bit more interesting. So if we map the Adios Pro 3 into this, you can see that the real sweet spot for that shoe is threshold race pace into max effort. It's a marathon racer. It's meant to get to your marathon pace, which isn't ultimately your fastest pace. It's not as fast as a 5K pace. And lock in there, and with the beautiful midsole, all of the rocker, the carbon fiber rods, everything about that shoe just helps you lock into that marathon pace and stay there and keep ticking over for the entire distance. It's a amazing marathon racing shoe. And that's why I think its real sweet spot is threshold to max effort, which is ultimately, from an effort standpoint, where your marathon pace should be, around threshold. But with the Evo 1, I think the Evo 1 is an even more focused shoe. And Adidas really set out to make the Evo 1 like the ultimate racer, the ultimate long distance racer, but really any racer at this point. I think they were really going for the versatility of the Vaporfly with this shoe. So the range of this shoe, I think, makes a lot of sense, where this shoe also does that threshold, but it's one that you can push just a little bit harder in. I think it goes to max effort. I think it does more versatile running. I think you can do 10K, 5Ks in the Evo 1, and we've seen some Adidas athletes doing that, favoring the Evo 1 over the Takumi Sen for shorter races. And I think that's really been quite good with the Evo 1. And obviously the Evo 1 has been very successful. So I think if you're looking at the Adizero marathon and half marathon race shoes, I think there's two obvious rotations that make sense here. For the Adios Pro 3, if that's your race shoe, and I think that's going to be most people's race shoe, and eventually this will be the Adios Pro 4, the Adizero SL is obviously your daily shoe, but I think your tempo shoe is the Takumi Sen 10. You really don't need the Boston 12 because, again, the SL2 is doing a lot of the running, and it can do a lot of what the Boston 12 did. And then the Takumi Sen is going to do all the fast stuff, all the 400s, 800s, maybe 1K repeats, all of that sort of stuff better than the Boston ever would. And for your long runs where you need to do marathon pace or you need to do any kind of that tempo work, the Adios Pro 3 is a great shoe. And in fact, it's one of the rare super shoes that the more you train in it, the better it gets. The Adios Pro 3 really sort of comes into its sweet spot after you put 75 to 100 miles onto it, and it feels even better. Where most other super shoes, when you're getting to 75, 100 miles, they kind of lose their pop and you kind of need to think about replacing them. That's not the case with the Adios Pro 3. The thing is a tank, and it just gets better the more you run in it. So if you're racing the Adios Pro 3, you just don't need the Boston 12. I think the Takumi Sen is the much better tempo shoe. However, if you're racing in the Evo 1, this is where I think the Boston 12 still makes a lot of sense, because the Evo 1 is not as durable as the Adios Pro 3. Now, it is much more durable than the 1 marathon or 50K that Adidas was saying when this shoe came out last fall. It's not like this shoe is going to explode when you hit 42.3K. You can do a lot more in this shoe, but still it doesn't have the range or the durability that the Adios Pro 3 did. It's much closer to a Vaporfly in that way. So you're not going to be doing the bulk of your long runs, marathon pace runs, all of that stuff in training in the Evo 1. So you do need a shoe to do that in. And that's where the Boston 12 relationship to the Evo 1 and the way the rocker feels and the way the forefoot and the toe off and everything about that shoe feels right. That's where these two shoes I think really work together. And I think that's a very valid use case still to have the Boston 12 in your rotation. And then obviously the SL2 still is doing all the daily stuff. It's still going to do that easy run through threshold running. But if you're doing a lot of long runs and that's part of a marathon build, you do need that more substantial, probably plated shoe to really do some of that longer effort, especially the longer effort at pace, which the SL2 can do, but the Boston 12 is immediately better and it will complement the Evo 1 quite well. It's not that the Boston 12 is completely irrelevant and totally useless now. It's not. It's still a great shoe, and I know a lot of people enjoy this, and I saw that in my comments. But the point I was trying to make, and what I'm clarifying in this video, is that I think 90% of what people were using this shoe for last year, because there really wasn't another Adizero option to do that in, is picked up a lot by this shoe. I think everything you did in this shoe, you can technically do in this shoe. The one thing this shoe now does better is that longer tempo running, where you want a plated or more substantial, stiffer shoe to really help you through those longer runs, which is important in a marathon build. You can do them in this shoe, but this is the better tool. And that's what this is. This is a tool. But that's also gotten me thinking a lot about the future of this shoe. Now, for 2024 now into 2025, we have seen leaks or releases of every Adizero shoe that we were expecting, except for a Boston 13. We have seen nothing about a Boston 13. In fact, with leaks, we're already beginning to see 2025 Adizero stuff. And in fact, the latest rumor that I'm hearing with the Adios Pro 4 is that the release for that isn't until 2025, spring 2025, which I don't really believe or want to believe, because I think Adidas really needs to come out with a replacement for the Adios Pro 3, but obviously the Evo 1 is still doing really well for them. So we'll see where this comes out. I kind of expect that there'll be a limited release of the Adios Pro 4 this fall, and the bulk or the main release will be in the spring of 2025. But regardless, we haven't really seen anything about a Boston 13. And that makes me wonder if there is going to be a Boston 13. And if there is, what is it going to be? Because again, this shoe has been designed to do a lot of what this shoe was doing. And the Takumi Sen does a lot of the threshold or faster running that I think a lot of people use this shoe for, I think, better. So where does that really leave the future of this shoe? I do think the Adizero range needs a tempo trainer, and that has traditionally been the Boston. However, there's also another shift going on with Adidas's running program, and I would call this the commodification of Lightstrike Pro foam. It's something I talked a lot about with Nike recently with Zoom X foam. Over the past couple of years, Nike has taken Zoom X out of the Vaporfly, and they've pretty much put it in every shoe in the Nike running line. And Adidas is just starting to do that now. I think you can see that in the Adizero SL2, because now there's all of this Lightstrike Pro core in this shoe. They could have totally made this shoe a Lightstrike Pro shoe, but it would have been too aggressive. It wouldn't necessarily been a trainer. Cost-wise, it probably would have been about the same, but there's a reason they did the construction like this. But there's a ton of Lightstrike Pro in this shoe, more than we've ever seen in a trainer or an entry-level shoe. Additionally, there's this shoe, the Adistar BYD, which isn't even an Adizero shoe, but it has Lightstrike Pro in it. The foam that's directly under the foot above the plate is Lightstrike Pro. So Adidas is obviously commodifying Lightstrike Pro because they have their next generation foam. They have Lightstrike Pro Evo, the PIVA that is in the Evo 1. And I think this is relevant because we've also seen leaks of something called an Evo C, which is supposed to be the consumer version of the Evo. However, in the past couple months, that shoe has really sort of fallen off. We saw a bunch about it in the spring, and we've seen zero about it since. And usually when a prototype kind of stops being leaked, means it's either dead, it's not happening, or they're going back and they're rethinking it. And part of what I'm thinking is, what is the relationship between a Lightstrike Pro Evo shoe, an Evo 1 or Evo C, and the Adios Pro 4? The Adios Pro is their flagship racer. The Evo 1 was a kind of stopgap last year when they failed to release the original Adios Pro 4. Evo 1 was an evolution to help them kind of move forward, and it's been very well for them. But now it's time to take that evolutionary stuff, bring it back into the Adios Pro 4, and I think that's what we're going to see in the Adios Pro 4. I think that's going to be Lightstrike Pro plus this Lightstrike Pro Evo foam, probably as a core in that shoe somehow. I still think that's what we're actually seeing in that shoe. So a consumer version of a Lightstrike Pro Evo shoe, the Lightstrike Pro Evo C, whatever that shoe is, if there is that shoe, what is that shoe? It doesn't make sense for Adidas to continue to have two flagship racers. So does that make the Lightstrike Pro Evo shoe the tempo trainer? Is that the Boston replacement? I've gone back and forth on this. When I first saw the Evo C, I was like, immediately, that's the new Boston. Then I kind of went back on that after I talked to some people, thought about it. And now I'm like, no, they're totally two different shoes. But now the more I've been thinking about it, and the more that I've been seeing what Adidas is doing with Lightstrike Pro, I'm wondering what that shoe is, if there's even going to be that shoe, or where these foams are going to go, or what the actual value or what a Boston 13 would actually be. Now, Adidas's shoes are also softening across the board. And I think, again, case in point here, this shoe is much softer, much more cushy than any previous Adizero shoe for years back. And across the line, Adidas's shoes are getting softer and softer, which is weird because I've always thought of Adidas shoes, even before Lightstrike Pro, to be just the firmer option, the more direct option. But Adidas seems to be toning that down. So if they're softening up the Adizero range considerably, and it does seem like that's what they're doing, does that make sense that something like a Boston 13 or a new Tempo trainer would be softer as well using the more advanced foam? I don't know, but it's interesting to speculate on. And the last thing that really ties all this together is I've talked about this in the guise of just super shoes and what the future of super shoes are. Link in the description to that video. But I do think there's a big tech shift coming over the next couple years, 2 to 3 years, where we're going to see new foams, new approaches, and just new tech in super shoes. It could be PIBA-based. It might not be PIBA-based. I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball to actually know that. If I did, I could make a lot more content around that, probably get a lot more views on this channel. But whatever it is, there is something next coming. And I think for Adidas, Lightstrike Pro Evo, their PIBA foam, is sort of their first step towards that direction. And I think it's going to be really interesting where these new foams are and what they feel like, because every brand is going to have some new foam. And it's going to be really interesting where all of these shoes evolve. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. Let me know in the comments if you like this format where I'm just sort of riffing, maybe rambling a little bit about shoes. But again, I want a place to be able to talk about very topical things that aren't me going over a full month or in one of my other more stricter formats, where I can just kind of riff on this stuff and talk about what I'm thinking. So let me know in the comments what you think about this format. But otherwise, thank you again for making it to the end of this video. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.